All right, so you want to get lost in a maze today, huh? I knew it. The Labyrinth. Seriously, though, it's one of those myths that just keeps popping up, right? Across cultures, through history. I mean, you send over museum stuff, travel blogs, even, what is this, a game guide. So yeah, clearly you're as hooked on this as I am, ready to go deep.
Yeah, it's kind of wild, isn't it? We're not just, retelling the same old Minotaur story. It's more like, how has the whole idea of the labyrinth changed? And then real archaeology gets thrown in the mix.
Yeah.
And then it pops up in video games. Talk about a long life for a myth.
Okay, so we've all got that picture in our heads. Minotaur, the maze, Theseus, poor Ariadne handing out thread like it's, I don't know, ancient string cheese or something. But here's the thing, right off the bat. Where even was this legendary maze? Because even the old sources can't seem to agree.
Oh, totally. You go back to Homer, he mentions the palace at Knossos, but zero labyrinth. Then Herodotus comes along, he's all, nope, Egypt, labyrinths totally in Egypt. And then good old Pliny the Elder, he throws in, wait for it, multiple labyrinths. And he suggests that the Egyptian one, that's the OG, right, that inspired the one on Crete. But even he says, in his time, there was nothing left of the Cretan one.
Okay, so let's say Knossos was abandoned, right? Like totally out of the picture. Why would anyone even think that's where the labyrinth was?
See, now that's where things get fun. Knossos. They weren't exactly Roman fans, put it that way, so it gets kind of ignored. Gorton, on the other hand, that's nearby. They're cool with the Romans. Become the Roman capital, actually. And guess what? They needed building materials, so they quarry stone from a hillside. And what do you get? Underground passages. Like a lot of them. Over time, writers, they get Knossos and Gorton mixed up. Boom, the labyrinth's address changes. Even that Roman poet, Catullus, he puts King Minos' home in Gorton. Like the guy who's supposed to own the labyrinth.
The real world's getting mixed up with the myths. That's so cool. Now, jump ahead a few centuries. Renaissance time, right? Everybody's rediscovering the classics and suddenly finding the real labyrinth. That's the hottest ticket in town. Labyrinth mania.
And it gets intense. You've got this guy, Cristoforo Buondelmonti, explores both Knossos and Gorton in 1415. By this time, Knossos is, well, it's pretty much a ghost town. Earthquake a few centuries back did a number on it. But Buondelmonti, he's not deterred. He slaps the labyrinth right on his map, a cave smack dab in the middle of the island.
Meanwhile, you've got those scholars, right, back in Europe, never even seen Crete, but they're positive they know where the labyrinth is. Based on, get this, coins.
Yeah, coins. Wolfgang Lazius, for example, he's pointing at those labyrinth designs on Knossos coins. Like, see? Proof. It just shows you how much people can look at the same thing and come up with wildly different ideas.
That's crazy. And this debate, it just goes on and on for centuries. 19th century, Captain Thomas Spratt, he's all about those Gorton caves. But Robert Pashley, he thinks the whole labyrinth thing is made up. But even he says if it did exist, Knossos, talk about a long-running argument.
Shows how powerful those early writings were, you know?
Yeah.
Shaped how people thought about the labyrinth for centuries.
But then, 1878, Minos Kalokerinos shows up, Cretan businessman, and he's inspired by, Heinrich Schliemann, the guy who found Troy. So Kalokerinos, he figures he'll give Knossos a shot. But here's the thing. He's not messing around with the Greco-Roman part of the city. He goes south Kefla Hill. What made him think that was the spot?
It's what archaeologists call intuition, I guess. Kalokerinos finds this building, right? And it's got these weird symbols carved into the walls. Based on how old they look, the style. He decides this has to be King Minos' palace. It's amazing how they put those pieces together, like a puzzle, connecting real stuff to those old stories.
That is really cool. I hadn't even thought about how much those Roman writers influenced things. So did Kalokerinos think that this was the labyrinth?
Oh, he found some underground passages, all right. Pretty interesting ones, too. But even with that, he was still stuck on those later writings, the ones that put the labyrinth in a cave. Even groundbreaking discoveries, they can get kind of twisted by what people already believe.
And then, 1894, Sir Arthur Evans comes along. At first, he's all about those underground passages, too. But what really catches his eye, those symbols on the walls, especially that double axe. It's like those symbols, they were the key to unlocking the myth, right?
Don't forget, at this time, Crete was part of the Ottoman Empire. Evans couldn't just dig whenever he wanted, had to wait for Crete to get its independence. Even politics got involved in figuring out this ancient site.
History, politics, archaeology, it's all tangled up. So Evans finally gets to dig, 1900 to 1904, uncovers this huge place, calls it the Palace of Minos. But what makes him so sure this is the labyrinth?
Well, there were those frescoes, the ones with the bull leaping. Pretty obvious connection to the Minotaur myth. But then Evans, He's got this theory about the word labrys. That's the old word for double axe. He thinks it's connected to the word labyrinth somehow. So his idea is the palace, with its crazy layout and all those double axe symbols, that is the labyrinth.
He's connecting a word to a symbol, to an entire building.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big leap, isn't it? How much evidence did he really have?
Yeah, that's a good question. Evans was a brilliant guy, no doubt, but people have been arguing about his ideas ever since.
And that's where things get even more interesting. Because Evans wasn't just happy digging stuff up, he starts reconstructing the palace. He even uses concrete to prop up his ideas, especially that north entrance. He's convinced that's the part that inspired the whole labyrinth myth. But how much reconstruction is too much? Are we helping people understand the past, or are we messing with it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the crazy thing is the myth-making. It hasn't stopped. You mentioned video games. Assassin's Creed Odyssey. They've got the Palace of Minos in there. And, of course, a labyrinth. We're still telling this ancient story, just in new ways.
Okay, so we've got this location that keeps moving, a controversial reconstruction, and video games bringing the myth to life. It's like the labyrinth is more than just a place. It's this idea that we keep playing with, reimagining. But what about the Minotaur? The monster at the center of it all, what does that symbolize, and why are we still so fascinated by it? That's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
It's easy to get, caught up in the whole maze thing, right? But the Minotaur, that's the real heart of this story. Yeah. This creature with the head of a bull, body of a man. Familiar, but also totally freaky.
Yeah. That mix of human and animal is just unsettling. Makes you wonder what it says about us,
Yeah.
What scares us even thousands of years later.
Totally. It's like that primal fear, right? The unknown, the monster, the other. And sticking it in a labyrinth, in darkness, that just cranks up the fear factor.
And don't forget the human sacrifice part. Athens sending those young people every 9 years just to keep this thing happy, that's a whole other level of messed up.
Absolutely. It plays on those deep anxieties we have, vulnerabilities, sacrifice, the fact that life can just end. And it makes you think about power, too. Why did Minos do that? Force Athens to send those tributes? Was he just cruel, or was there something more going on?
Yeah, Minos' whole deal, that's definitely something to unpack. But I'm also thinking about the Minotaur's origins. I mean, let's just say his birth was a little unconventional. Pasiphae, his mom falls for a bull, and well, you get a Minotaur.
That's just wrong on so many levels. It messes with the natural order of things, the lines between human and animal. The Minotaur becomes this symbol, right, of crossing boundaries, of what happens when you defy the gods.
Because Poseidon, he sent that bull to Minos as a gift, supposed to be a sacrifice. But Minos, he keeps it for himself. And that's when everything goes sideways.
Total hubris. That human thing, thinking we can take more than we deserve. And the Minotaur.
Yeah.
He's like a walking, talking embodiment of that, this constant reminder of what Minos did wrong.
So you've got this dark side of humanity all wrapped up in the Minotaur. But then you've got Theseus, classic hero, goes into the labyrinth, kills the monster, saves the day. Good versus evil, right?
Not so fast. Theseus, he needs Ariadne, Minos' daughter. She gives him the thread, the whole breadcrumbs trick, so he can find his way out. He couldn't have done it alone.
True. Ariadne's thread. That's become such a powerful symbol.
Yeah.
Guidance, cleverness, figuring out how to solve a problem strategically.
It makes you think about how we need help sometimes, too, when we're facing a tough choice or just trying to find our way. That thread, it's a reminder that we don't have to figure it all out by ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not just about getting out of a physical maze. It's about finding the resources, the people who can help us when we're lost. But then there's the whole Theseus ditching Ariadne thing. After they escape, total betrayal. It shows that even heroes, they mess up.
Totally. And that's what makes the myth so interesting, right? It's not just good guys and bad guys. There's this gray area that we're still dealing with today.
Even in a hero story, things aren't always black and white. It's not just about beating the monster. It's about the choices you make along the way. Speaking of which, there was something in that research you sent, something about this myth maybe being connected to a real civilization. The Minoans.
Oh, yeah. The Minoans, they were a Bronze Age culture on Crete. And bulls. Huge part of their thing. They even had these bull-leaping rituals. Young men and women jumping over charging bulls. Can you imagine?
And some people think those rituals, that's where the Minotaur myth came from. Like this terrifying creature, it might be based on something real.
Myths, they often start with real stuff, and then the imagination takes over. They take our experiences and turn them into these big, epic stories that tap into our fears, our desires, all of it.
Talking about fears and desires, there was also that thing about how the myth was used for political reasons. The Athenians, they were rivals with the Cretans, right? And they used the Minotaur myth to make the Cretans look bad.
Oh, yeah, they were saying, look at these barbarians, demanding human sacrifices. We're the good guys fighting against these tyrants. Pretty smart propaganda, actually.
You start to realize stories, even ancient ones, they're never really neutral. They always come from a certain point of view, a certain time and place.
And that viewpoint, it can change over time, leading to new interpretations, like with video games, right? Retelling the myth for today's audience. Assassin's Creed, they let you explore the palace of Minos, even fight the Minotaur.
It's like the myth has become this playground for our imaginations. We can explore these timeless ideas, heroism, fear, all that.
Exactly. And it's not just games. The Labyrinth and the Minotaur, they show up everywhere. Books, movies, even psychology.
Which brings us to a big question. Why are we still so drawn to this myth? This story from thousands of years ago, what does it tell us about ourselves here in the 21st century?
That's what we'll be looking at in the final part of our deep dive.
You know, it really is amazing, isn't it? This story, it's ancient, right? From ancient Greece. But somehow it still feels, I don't know, relevant. Like you'd think we'd be over minotaurs and mazes by now. But nope, we're still kind of obsessed with it.
I think it's those themes, you know, the big ones. Heroism, facing your fears, sacrifice, all that. Those things, they don't really go out of style, do they?
Nope, they sure don't. And you know what else gets me? How this myth, it can change. It's not just one set story. It's like a starting point, and then every culture, every time period, they make it their own.
Yeah, like those video games you mentioned. Assassin's Creed, they take the basic stuff, right? Labyrinth, Minotaur, Theseus. But they put it into this whole new world, and the players, they're not just watching anymore, they're in the story, making choices that change how it ends.
They're like writing their own version of the myth. Which reminds me of all the other ways people have reinterpreted the Labyrinth. I mean, you've got novels, movies, even psychology stuff. There's that story by Jorge Luis Borges, The House of Asterion, I think. He tells it from the Minotaur's point of view. It's kind of sad, actually. Minotaur becomes this tragic figure trapped in his own maze.
It's like turning the whole story upside down, right? You get a totally different perspective. And then you've got Carl Jung, the psychologist. He saw the labyrinth as like a metaphor for the unconscious mind.
Right.
And the Minotaur, that becomes the shadow self, all of the stuff we try to hide, even from ourselves.
So it's not a real maze anymore. It's a journey, right? Inside yourself.
Right.
So see your inner demons, all that. It's crazy how a myth this old can still tell us something about, you know, what it means to be human, even today.
I think that's why we keep coming back to it. It's not just a story. It's like a mirror. It reflects our fears, the stuff we want, all the things we struggle with, that human need to find meaning, even when life is, well, a bit of a mess. All those twists and turns, those dead ends in the labyrinth, they're like our own lives, in a way.
And the Minotaur, he's like those obstacles we face, those challenges that seem impossible. But like Theseus, we can figure out how to get through it. Maybe we even have our own Ariadne's thread, those people, those resources that can help us.
It's not about getting rid of the darkness or the monsters completely. It's more like learning how to live with them, figuring out how to navigate the shadows, both inside ourselves and in the world.
So back to that question we asked, right? What does your version of the Labyrinth myth say about our time?
Think about it. What are the labyrinths we're facing today? What are the monsters lurking in there? And how do we become the Theseus, the hero who finds a way through? Do we have our own Ariadne's thread to help us?
Something to think about, right?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of the point of this whole deep dive. We're not just here to give you information. It's about sparking that curiosity, that desire to keep learning, asking questions, making those connections.
The labyrinth is out there. What will you discover when you enter it?
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But I hope you enjoyed it and found it as fascinating as we did. Keep exploring.